Hello, hello. We are letting people in. Please hold tight.
Is it okay if I go down and use your speakers?
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Andrews. I'm the Executive Director for EveryOne Home. Thank you for joining us today. It's an exciting time for our community. We are launching the 2021 HUD Continuum of Care Notice of Funding Opportunity process in our community, and we welcome you. This meeting is a meeting that is being recorded and will be made available on our website for those who were unable to attend today, but also for your reference in the future. EveryOne Home is the Continuum of Care lead for Alameda County. And this year we have the benefit of working with a consultant Homebase for our 2021 COC NOFO process. And so today, Homebase will be giving an overview of this year's NOFO, what that process will look like, as well as have an opportunity to get feedback from you all in regards to, in particular, our renewal application, our renewal project applications. We have asked you, it should hopefully be muted, your line's muted, but if you have the speaker on, please make sure you mute. Also, feel free to utilize the chat as needed. There will be opportunity for input and questions, but if you have thoughts along the way, please feel free to share them with us. With that, I am going to introduce Aram Haslam with Homebase and allow him an opportunity to give an overview. Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm going to jump into our agenda, and then I'll introduce my colleagues who are also on in a moment, but most of the folks pictured, I think, on screen, we have some EveryOne Home folks and then some members of the community on video. My name is Aram Housley. Again, I'm a senior staff attorney with Homebase and joined by my colleagues, Max and Esther. And we will be monitoring the chat and taking down feedback and helping go through this presentation. So we are not going to do like a full round of introductions, but folks in the community, I welcome. I'll just skip to that slide for a second, but folks in the community, welcome if you want to put in the chat your name or any affiliation that you have there as well. And then on the next slides, I'll introduce some other folks who may be in the room. But to start off with the agenda, we'll do basically brief introductions. I'm going to summarize the 2021 HUD NOFO. If you've been around for a minute, used to be the NOFA. And we are trying to get used to availability changing to opportunity. Sounds much more a brighter future, I'd say. We have strategic direction that we will share from the COC board, some HUD and local timelines. We'll look at what the process looked like back in 2019. If folks remember, last year, everyone basically got renewed. So the most recent one would be 2019. And we'll look at the scoring criteria that there was a lot of input that year. And so largely, I think a lot of it's going to remain untouched, but something we'll introduce the NOFO committee as a concept in a minute. And that group is helping to determine and finalize scoring criteria, and they will be the folks ranking the projects. So there's one change we're looking at making to the renewal tool, though, just based on every year, sometimes the NOFO comes out and says things that should be in your tool. So those different things we'll highlight there. and then finally do some just updates about what it looks like locally and follow with some next steps and kind of look at the timeline again there. So with that, I'm going to jump in, but after each section, I will pause for questions and comments. So right now, we're probably small enough where I can probably ask you to just come off mute, but if not, just use chat features or use your raise hand feature, and we will get to you. And then at the end, I think we have our home-based contact info. So if something doesn't get answered or you still have follow-up questions, it's a way for you all to use us. So just quickly about Home-Base, we are a public policy nonprofit organization. We work solely on the issue of homelessness. We work heavily in the Bay Area, all across California, and into Guam and other islands and Alaska and all over the country. So we have fortunately it gives us perspective because we have our hands in a lot of different communities and are seeing what is going on, and supporting folks through this process is old hat to us. So really here to help make the process smooth for everyone involved, and to just emphasize transparency through the process, as well as we are very neutral providers and will provide the same type of information to anyone who will ask. Thank you everyone for putting your stuff in the chat. I won't ask these folks to come off mute or anything, but just to sort of intro some key groups that may have reps in the room. So through the COC program, the Continuum of Care program, every community is required to have a board that helps to do guidance and process and provide strategic direction. So locally, that is your HUD COC committee. These are the members of the committee, with Simone Falls being the chair. So this committee is helping to make decisions that guide the process, but ultimately a lot of the specific scoring decisions about criteria and ranking will be done by the NOFO committee and appeals board. I really just want to highlight that the people making these decisions and on this list are not conflicted. They sign conflicts of interest forms to say that they're not conflicted, so the people don't have a stake in the outcome of the projects being awarded. So your NOFO committee is the group that is going to continue to meet regularly to review scoring criteria, think about some things for new projects, and then ultimately do the reviewing and ranking. And that process will look a little bit different this year, and my colleague Max will help explain some of that in a little while, but all for hopefully the better. Less math, easier access, easier online stuff. So that's the direction we're going. And then the NOFO appeals board are non-conflicted folks who can handle anybody who appeals decisions made by the NOFO committee. I think we're just waiting to establish a final non-conflicted member from the NOFO committee to do appeals, but everybody else is in place there. So to get us just a little familiar with who might be in the room, I'm gonna have some Zoom polls launched, and we'll just do a couple questions. One is gonna be about if this is your first NOFA or NOFO ever. If it's your first NOFO, it may be, that might be too easy, but if you've done this a while, that's what we're trying to get at. And the second question is, have you used Homebase's system Presto ever to do scoring? So that should be a pop-up on your screen right now. A little pop-up box came up on your screen. We'll just give folks a little bit more time to answer. I think we're at about 60% have answered. And then we will end the poll and share, just so we know kind of who's in the room. But always good to know who's done this a bunch and could be resources, and who is new. And maybe some partnerships could be made as we talk about new projects and things like that. Seems like we've slowed down with folks answering. Oh, a couple more. See, one more second if anybody. I think we have 5 folks who haven't voted, just to see, but we're at about 86%. Okay. So should be able to see, and you can flag if you can't see, but should be able to see the results. First NOFA, most people have done this before. So 3 out of 4 people in the room have been through a process like this before and applied for COC funding. Good to hear. Glad to see reaching some new folks. You may be new because you're interested in learning about new projects, or you may be new just because you're new to the agency. So either is great, and glad to have you here. Presto, which we'll say more about, but is a home-based proprietary software that allows us to integrate like objective information through APRs and other things with narrative-based questions to produce easy to read reports about how you'll be scored, so that you can review and make sure you understand how you're being scored, but as well make it easy for the people who are going to score you. So only a handful of folks have used that before, but that'll be super helpful for you. If you've used it before, and if you have not, we are going to have opportunities in the future to walk you through how to use it and provide daily, sometimes hourly, technical assistance available to you all, reach by email, phone, anything like that. So thank you for participating in the poll. I will pause before I get into summarizing just to see if there were any questions on what I've reviewed thus far. So get a hand up, probably come off mute if you want to. Cool. So I often look to see who comes off mute. So if you're just still listening, it's helpful to stay on mute because I'm trying to monitor who comes off that wants to speak. So just making sure, Daniel, if you have anything to say, jump in. Okay, looks like good to go. So we'll keep watching. So next I'm going to summarize what this year's NOFO looks like for everyone. And I'm going to talk about priorities and some new projects and how much money is available and all of that. But I think a good starting place is to examine HUD's stated policy priorities. So generally, your community as a whole has to fill out an application. So Homebase and Everyone Home will be working together with the county to produce an application that gets scored, and that kind of indicates how well you did across the country and how much money you might get for new projects. It's directly related. So if you're ever getting bugged about system performance or annual assessments or increasing income, it's because all of that stuff ultimately feeds back into the whole community and the community's score. So down to the intake and annual assessments you do, all of that feeds into ultimately how all of Alameda gets scored. So HUD uses these following priorities to help direct continuums of care. Put little tags by them, whether they're revised, returned, or new. If they're revised, they basically have been stated before by HUD explicitly, but they may have changed some language a little bit. So ending homelessness for all persons, very much a continued goal for all of us. I don't think there's much more to be said there. The revision there comes from them just wanting to continue to look at racial equity, people with lived experience, and continuing to coordinate across different sectors. Using a housing first approach, in 2019, the NOFA had housing first watered down just a little bit, but this administration has recommitted to the evidence-based practice of housing first, and all products applying renewal and new need to be committed to using that. And we definitely have resources if that's a new concept for any of you. Reducing unsheltered homelessness. It says it's new because it's a new stated priority. You've always been scored on that. But really stating that explicitly by HUD, I think, especially in response to COVID and how vulnerable people are who are unsheltered during this time. Improving system performance measures, always there, wanting folks to do quality control and improvement over system performance, but I'll note a change about the emphasis on that in a minute in the next slide. Partnering with Housing, Health, and Service Agency is a new thing that they're really putting a lot of stock into. So for example, if you have a new project and they are able to leverage non-COC funds, or they are able to leverage healthcare or substance abuse services for people, the whole community will actually get bonus points. So when we talk a little bit more about new projects, and I think there'll be future meetings in the community about new projects, but those are things to be considering at this point. Addressing racial equity. In 2019, they started looking at this a little bit and kind of seeing what programs are doing, but now more and more, as we see, and it's of great importance, racial equity being really a high priority for HUD and going to be asked to speak to the work that's being done. Fortunately for Alameda County, I think Everyone Home has done a lot of work already with their centering, equity, and system modeling, and so are ahead of the game in terms of HUD's point of view, but obviously a lot of work still to be done to make stuff happen there. And finally, again, not totally new, but new stated by HUD, including persons with lived experience. So if any of you on the call have lived experience, I encourage you to weigh in, because HUD is saying, one, it's a best practice to be following the lead of folks with lived experience, but they're also scoring the community on its ability to have done that. So kind of a twofold piece there. And I'll pause in a minute for questions. I wanted to note some big changes if you are familiar to this process. In 2019, there was 50 million available for domestic violence bonus projects due to great advocacy. There is double that available. This is nationwide. I'll speak to how much your community can apply to. But the good thing is that there's emphasis keeps being put on this, and we know during COVID, things only got worse for people in isolation. So glad to see that there. Tier one,
Aaron?
the second one, yeah.
We have a question in the chat from the previous slide that I just, sorry.
Perfect. Paul, inclusion at what level? And I'm assuming you're talking about the lived experience inclusion. They want to see it kind of at every state. So if we're going to look at some stuff related to scoring tools, that would be a place for people with lived experience to weigh in. Anytime a COC board at large is meeting on process or direction or anything like that, this would be a place you'd want to see them worked in. So I would say at every level down to the project level and how you are getting input through surveys and people on your board. So great question. And my short answer is all levels. So hopefully that helps explain that piece. So the other big noteworthy change is that in past years, if you're familiar with HUD's tiering process, normally some projects that renew or fall towards the bottom of your priority list, they get put kind of more at risk because they fall into tier two. What HUD, I think in light of COVID has done is said, tier one is equal to your entire renewal demand. So the amount that is the total of all the projects renewing from the previous year, all of that can fit in tier one. That's new. It used to be that some fell in tier two. So if the NOFO committee and input here indicates there's a high priority for renewal projects to stay in tier one, then that is something we can certainly listen to. The only reason a renewal then would fall into tier two is if for some reason a new project was identified to have scored better or there was a priority to put them above, but there is enough money to put everyone in tier one. Tier two is equal to the COC bonus amount. In most years, HUD tries to allow for additional projects to be created. So I'll get to that in a second, but those calculations are a little bit different. I want to note that tribes and tribally designated housing entities are eligible to apply, which is different than in years past. So as you all, if you are connected or affiliated with any of these folks, certainly encourage you to help us keep people in the loop and let us know if there's anybody else we should reach out to for applying for projects. The fourth point here is that the application this time around de-emphasizes system performance. They recognize that the community over the past year may have struggled to do as much in terms of ending homelessness for folks, and the other key, HUD has 7 key system performance measures related to housing and returns to exits and increasing income, all very easily Googleable. But this year, there's more of an emphasis on included the lived experience, the racial equity, things like that. But as the last bullet says, it will highly likely to be a high priority again in 2022, and we may still be seeing impacts of that. So something to consider as the community as a whole, as you continue to work towards improving system performance measure, but accommodating people in the time of COVID. Let me see. I think I have this slide and another, and then can pause again for questions, but definitely feel free to put them in the chat. So what's available to you all? So the total annual renewal demand, or for short ARD, is 38 million and change. Again, that is the amount that would allow you to renew every project you had last time around. So you'll see the same number is put in the tier one amount, 100% of ARD. The tier two amount is the COC bonus. So there's new projects if you want to apply for a new project, or you know folks who might, there is up to 1.9 million available to do new projects. And I will, in a few, show what that looks like. I think what they are. Let me see. But new projects generally are going to be PSH, RH, TH, RH is a joint thing you can do, HMIS, and coordinated entry. You can do all of that stuff in bonus. DV bonus is a separate pot of money. And that money, as we said, was doubled from the last year in terms of what's available nationally. Locally, a big chunk of money is there. So another 1.9 million. So you have almost 4 million in new projects you could create between the tier two bonus amount and the DV bonus. So DV bonus has to serve survivors, but you could expand an existing program that doesn't serve survivors, and if the new money will support survivors, or you can create brand new programs, and you can do rapid rehousing, transitional housing, the joint transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and you can do a coordinated entry. Great question, Beth. The question in the chat is, to clarify, DV bonus renewal is in tier 1 or DV bonus? So if the community moves forward in trying to preserve renewal projects, then that new project, like any other new project, would likely end up in tier 2. Now, let's say the community is like, I don't want to risk putting it in a national competition. I think we should get this new DV project or this expansion DV project into tier 1 so we know it's funded. You can put it into tier 1. It will first always go through the DV competition nationally. So if it goes through the national competition and wins, it just gets pulled right out of tier 1 again and everybody moves up. But it guarantees that you would get the money. I'll say guarantees in quotes because you never know, but guarantees as in if Congress and HUD does everything they've basically intended and said they would do and allotted for this program. So, so DV bonus will first go into a national competition. It's going to be ranked on how the application does, how the experience level that the product has, and there's more detailed information in the NOFO that explains that. Now, let's say you didn't put it in tier 1 and you didn't get it win in DV bonus. You could still score it high enough in tier 2 that it would enter the tier 2 national competition. So there are a few different ways that DV bonus could get approved, even if it doesn't get pulled out from the actual competition itself. But the DV bonus and any new project you put into tier 2, everybody goes, and even a renewal project that dropped into tier 2, everybody goes into a national competition. And that national competition, again, is 50 points of 100 are going to be based on how well the overall COC app did. And that's why system performance and all the other stuff is always important because it shows how much we score. 40 points will go to like a funky formula HUD has, but like where you put them in tier 2. Did you put them at the top? Did you do them at the bottom? And then the last 10 points is a commitment to housing first, which is in Alameda County required. So it should be easy to get that. Another question in the chat from Beth, is that the same process for renewal as for a DV bonus project? So anything you'd be doing with DV bonus would be an expansion of an existing project, which means that piece of it would have to get run through a new project application different from the renewal, or it would be a brand new project, which again would then go through the new process. So only projects that are renewing at the exact same amount go through the existing renewal process that I don't think we're straying from. The NOFO committee is going to listen to some feedback today on what's happening here, and we will relay them and speak with them later in the week. So if anybody's like, oh, I think this should really be changed, that's something we can take to this group. And that's why we're having this meeting today, is that before any other final decisions are made, to preview what it's going to look like. Hopefully that helps, Beth. I'm going to do this last slide and then I'll again pause for questions. So some of these may have already, let's see. Yeah, I think most of these are new. So strategy considerations, HUD always puts in language like if funding for some reason becomes unavailable to award all tier 1, which is all your renewals potentially, or that amount, then they still can say they can reduce it. So I've never seen it happen in years, but it's always kind of like a cover your butt kind of thing. So ranking, even if you decide to put all your renewals in tier 1 and that's the decision, it's still really important to rank them just in case anything happens. So that would be a key piece. Paul, I think is speaking to the question before, if you attach a bonus project to an existing project, would that put the existing project in jeopardy? Not the renewal amount. The renewal amount will be scored in the way it's always scored. The expansion would be looked at as a new project. If there's enough money to do it all, HUD will just collapse them all together and make one bigger project. But the expansion would be the one that is maybe considered newly, whereas the existing renewal would have the old scoring tool criteria applied to it. So no, expanding would not hurt you. I will say a general message, and I think everyone home will support, is that if you are already struggling to spend your money or meet performance objectives, and whether this is a new thing or an old thing, I would really hesitate to apply for an expansion. If you're like, I use all my money, everyone gets housed, we increase everyone's income, that's the project that should get expanded. There may be a community need that comes up that maybe says more to that story, but that's generally how I would look at expansions. Leslie asking, if you were funded prior to 2019, but not in 2019, are you new? So if I'm guessing then you lost funding or chose not to apply, you would likely be brand new. Yeah. If you were, yeah, unless you were renewing year over year, if there's a gap in a year, then it would be new. I'd be interested to potentially, we could look into providing technical assistance and see what happened there, but home base and everyone home is there. So cool, I see thumbs up, okay. Good questions. Let me keep chugging. So definitely we want everyone to be ranked and ranked appropriately. HUD is going to prioritize COCs for new funding. They're going to prioritize COCs that have demonstrated the capacity to reallocate funding from lower to higher performing projects, something I think the county has worked on to do over many years. So it may not be necessary this year, but you either have to show that you have been reallocating or that your products are generally doing pretty well and barely scored differently and meeting all high metrics. If you can show all that, then I don't think you will be penalized. And I have a note later, but just in case anybody's curious, the existing reallocation policy will be voluntary. It's going to be voluntary again. You will not be forced to reallocate. You may get a tap on the shoulder that says, this might be a good idea to do so, but it won't impact you if you choose not to, other than how you will just be scored in the regular competition, but I'll touch on that again. COCs may receive up to 10 bonus points on the application if we have new products that either use non-COC or ESG resources to fund part of their project housing, or if they leverage healthcare provided through service providers or dedicate a quarter of the funding that they request to services. So this is where the NOFO committee will be having more discussion, but in terms of new projects, this is something that likely, and if you're interested in them, this is something to really flag for yourself now. Start getting your MOUs together, start thinking about who you're gonna leverage. But if you think you have non-COC fund money to bring to the table and to do a new project combined with COC, the whole community gets bonus and it's more likely to be funded. Same with healthcare stuff. If you know that you can partner with folks or really dedicate a significant chunk of your funding to services, then the community will get bonus points there. So Paul's asking, are we showing a service match or actual money in hand? So match, always you have to do 25% just regularly. So what you would be showing is that you have in your budget, you're going to be able to show that there's a portion of funding that is coming in from a non-COC source. And so you'd have to have something, I'd say it's almost beyond a match. It's probably a contract. It's probably a subcontract relationship or something like that to be able to show if you're actually bringing in different housing money or your organization's contract with the provider of that funding. That's probably what HUD is looking for there. In terms of the healthcare provided, if you are getting somebody to provide services or substance abuse stuff, they're going to want to see more like an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. So some written document that says, we have this arrangement, we're going to do this, they're going to do that, and it's clear. It doesn't necessarily require dollars, but it gets real nuanced. But if you decide to go basically and you say, I think we could have someone match 25% of our funding to provide services and you could show cash match, that would meet one of these criteria as well. So if anybody's thinking of this stuff too, good to bug us sooner than later. So again, our email is going to be Alameda. Maybe Esther or Max is a good time if you could drop that into the chat. But you can put our group email that you can start bugging us. You have your Everyone Home friends as well who can relay stuff to us as well. But we can start helping you think about that. But Esther just put that in the chat. The other thing I wanted to share is that sometimes when you apply for a new project, it's really hard to spend all your money in 1 year. So previously HUD said, well, we'll give you 18 months, but then they gave you 18 months of funding. So you really just had more money to spend. Now what they're basically saying is you can have an 18-month period to spend 1 year of funds. So you're a brand new project, you basically get a 6-month ramp up to when you have staff in place and you have your clients sourced and put into your units, and then you have a year to spend your money. So I think it's super wise. I'm glad they've done this, but it really helps the ramp up period. And a lot of times, as does your community, people have to put in, well, if so-and-so doesn't have a full year of data, there's certain passes for them. This will start over time to uncomplicate that piece. New projects can also apply a lot of details, but for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 15-year like PSH grants as well, which is something that hasn't been there in a bit. So we can talk to folks more about that. Okay, that was a lot. It's about a little ways to go, but I will pause. Thank you for putting the questions in. But any other questions, drop in chat, come off mute. I heard someone trying to come through, but didn't catch. Maybe put in your chat if needed. Okay, and we can.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I have a question. I'm following up on Beth's questions. I'm still confused about, so if we have money from DV bonus from the past 2 years, and we're looking for renewal of that amount and an expansion. So the renewal could go into tier 1, right? And then the expansion has to go through the national competitive process, or does the whole thing have to go through the national competitive process because it's all DV bonus?
Good questions. If you had DV bonus and were awarded a project in previous years, you are no longer a DV bonus project. You are a regular COC project being refunded and renewed.
Okay.
Separately from, so in that sense, that's why we can make sure we know last year was an auto renewal. So if you got money in 2019, you renewed in 2020, and now you're renewing again, you're just a renewal like everybody else. Still very special for serving DV, but you're not carved out in the DV context. If you choose to expand a project, anyone can actually expand. A DV project can expand, or anyone can expand as long as the expansion directly serves people impacted by violence. That money, that expansion, will go into the national competition as a DV bonus project and be determined whether it'll be selected. If it's selected there, you don't have to worry about your ranked list wherever they were. If it's not selected there, but you put them in tier 1, they're probably going to get funded. A lot of communities are having their renewals stay in tier 1. We get that in some instances because you don't want people to get kicked out of housing, right? You want renewal products to stay around. But if people are struggling to perform, or somebody wants to reallocate, then additional money could be available, and a new project could in theory end up in tier 1 as well, and then be protected in tier 1 if it didn't win DV. None of those things happen, and it remains in the second tier 2. Then again, it goes into a different national competition with different criteria and can be awarded in that way. I know there's a lot. We have a summary of all this too. And yeah, go ahead.
And so the local, like our Alameda County NOFO committee, decides ultimately what goes into tier 1.
They're going to be determining if anything needs to be changed in the scoring criteria, whether there should be any emphasis on any of these new projects to get that money. Yes, the NOFO committee will have some say in that. I think there's direction from the board to continue to try and preserve existing projects, but I think the NOFO committee is going to consider, especially in light of how many bonus points you can get for the whole community, what might make sense for housing and or healthcare leveraged new projects. So if folks want to weigh in, I think maybe I can get a little more through this and then we can kind of touch on that again if you all have thoughts on whether you think we should be promoting a new project versus preserving. And feel free to just even drop that in the chat if you have comments, and then we can try and aggregate that.
Thank you.
Of course. So part of this comes down to some of the guidance to the NOFO committee and home base and everyone home is, okay, there's strategic direction that the larger COC board has. And these are the guiding principles. So there's principles and directions, and this will sort of state where the larger board has landed on things. To be blunt, the larger board may have people that receive renewal grants. And that's why the NOFO committee who's making the decisions is not conflicted like that, right? So that's why the decision is more left to them to think of the whole community as a whole and what is best to continue to be competitive based on HUD's rules. And that's why some of this decision making happens in that smaller non-conflicted group to make sure not influenced totally by a person who may have stake in renewal money. So guiding principles by the HUD COC committee, and it appears the NOFO committee is generally in line with those as well, but we're going to meet later this week as well. But maximizing resources available to the community, it potentially is where that new money kind of conversation comes in. Package submitted will align with HUD's priorities in order to meet local needs, prioritizing ensuring existing residential capacity. So that's kind of right now the priority for existing renewal programs. Certainly want to keep the renewal process as simple as possible and transparent. And so that's part of why I think Homebase is helping support. And we're going to use Homebase's kind of portal for you guys to apply, because it will make things easier for you all and the people who have to renew your applications who used to have to do a lot of math. So trying to cut down on that. We're going to continue to emphasize project performance and meeting HUD's thresholds. So housing first, coordinate entry, system performance measures, all of that stuff. Support individual projects seeking to reallocate, reclassify where relevant. So if somebody should give up a little money and they want to, so they can score better in the future or really right size their project, that's what we're saying there. Facilitate a clear, fair, and transparent local process to what we've been speaking out. And then of course, as can advocate locally and nationally to protect and fund projects that add value to the COC and the response to homelessness. Those kind of feed into the strategic direction, and I'll pause in a minute again to see if folks have questions. I'll get through this. So ranking, there's been and this is pretty common, but HMIS and coordinated entry projects often aren't ranked the same way as housing projects, and it's something you all consider at what point if you want to rank that stuff. But for now, and in many communities, if there's an HMIS or CE project that supports like basically the whole community in the system, you automatically rank it at the bottom of tier 1, and that seems to be at the practice. So the housing projects come in, and then these projects, these are renewals, and they are also included in the full amount of tier 1 being renewed. So they're not like taking away anything. So they go there. It says in quotes new projects. Those are basically renewals that have not ramped up and don't have a full year of data. They sort of get a pass for that first year, acknowledging maybe their data is just going to crush them and maybe push them too far down. So those folks also get ranked at the bottom of tier 1. Volunteer, and I'll go through a couple of the other policies a little bit later, but this was based on the strategic direction. So voluntary reallocation, again, as I mentioned before, encouraging voluntary reallocation. And it's not necessarily just because COVID killed you, but if you like it's been a bunch of years, then that would really be more appropriate to consider having a conversation about that. But no one will be forced to, as it could have been in years past. Soliciting applications for new applications through reallocation, expansion, or bonus. So this is again is the consideration of how do you get more money in. If you get new projects, it increases your ARD, everybody gets more money, it keeps going up, more money for the community. So that's why you always want to apply for all the bonus money if you can, even if it's all in tier 2, because you just never know. You might score really well and then get a lot more than you anticipated. Racial equity and lived experience, a continued commitment there. And I think we'll be using a lot of the work that's already gone on in Alameda to make sure that continues to happen. And then because bonus points for like random things or random projects can sometimes kind of alter the overall like picture of out of 100 points, there's direction to try and avoid using bonus points for certain things. So with that, I'll check my time. Take some questions or comments if anybody has. Otherwise, I'm going to get into timelines and more about local process. Okay, timelines, key dates from HUD and for the local competition. Local stuff, I think we're still in a proposed but close state, and that should be finalized soon, but wanted people to start having things on their radar. First is HUD stuff. So this is what HUD puts out. This is available in the NOFO. So the NOFO was released on August 18th. More information came out the 19th. And then we're all working ultimately towards this bottom deadline of Tuesday, November 16th. So that's when everything has to be in. But HUD puts some other stuff in place, which are key things that mean that local stuff has to get done in time. So for example, by October 17th, the COC has to have everyone's application. So we're working backward from that date, from like when you all might have things due. But before that, like you have to have appeals, and before that it has to be ranked, and before that. So we're working back from those, and you'll see that in a minute on the next slide. The other dates are November 1st. COC must tell everyone whether they're getting funding or not. So again, working off of those to allow for appeals. And then November 14th, 2 days before the final submission, everything needs to go online and be publicized on the website, which has been the process in the past and will continue to be there so that folks can have one last shot to share any community input. The proposed local timeline, some of those dates, first date is the one I already mentioned. Today is what we're in now, is community input session. So really trying to kind of kick off, get any initial input so that NOFO committee can make some informed decisions, and then get the process going for renewals and then new. So this is the kickoff, and then through September 1st, people can submit comments in order to, if you have additional comments or you know someone didn't make this meeting, we're recording it. I think it's going to be shared so people can also weigh in for a few more days if they missed this particular meeting. The 13th is probably the next biggest date because we're going to do a bidders conference, and that's going to occur, it looks like 9 to 11 a.m. And this is where the same day the information might come out a little bit sooner via email for renewal folks to start seeing it. But if you're renewing, the process will probably be relatively similar in terms of scoring, but you're going to apply a little bit different and use some home-based tools there. We're also going to let folks know more details about the new projects. So things I've spoken about before, and we'll have clear guidance whether any new projects will be more considered for tier 1. But that's the big date to keep on the calendar, is the 13th. And then question and answer, and we'll have things due likely on October 8th. So give folks almost a month, which feels pretty good. In past years, sometimes folks only get 2 to 3 weeks. This is a pretty good chunk of time. I will say, if you're thinking about a new project, you should start thinking about it today if you haven't already. Don't wait for us to kick off new information. Start thinking, who might I want to serve? What line items might I want to use? Leasing or rental assistance, or what I'm trying to do. And certainly we can help you think through. Homebase will be available along the way to support and provide a lot of guidance. And then basically the dates that look a little like or really come down to, we're still just nailing down some scheduling with our review and rating and review panel and the appeals panel. But appeals will likely be a 2-day period, which I think is longer than maybe folks have had before, but it's pretty standard across all the communities we work in. And hopefully we're making it easy enough so that that's not a non-issue. And then you can see when things are going to be finally posted and then submitted to HUD there. I am, as we talk about next steps, I can bring the timeline up again, but is there any initial questions or comments on HUD or the proposed local timeline? Okay, I'm going to come back to it. So if you don't think of something, then I can flash it up again near the end, the local timeline. So I want to look at the last time you all saw your criteria was 2019. So I just want to flag some local process stuff that has been essentially approved already at the COC board level, and then the renewal project scoring criteria that was used in 2019, and folks can weigh on whether they're comfortable with it basically staying the same. I'm going to do it at somewhat of a high level. If folks have questions, we can try and dig in or take back to NOFO committee, but that's what I'm going to start with here. So this is information. I'm going to talk a little bit about policy first, ranking, voluntary reallocation, and then scoring and appeals. Hitting the high notes, there are documents available for all of these things that speak in more detail, and happy to get those to anybody interested, or maybe with follow-up to this. So as I sort of alluded to before, HMIS and coordinated entry don't receive scores. They will be placed at the bottom of tier 1. If you are a renewal for the first time or a quotes newish project, you will be automatically placed at the bottom of tier 1 above the HMIS and CE projects. Ranking will be alphabetical, but if for any reason it's something ends up in tier 2, then the NOFO committee will make strategic decisions of where best to put the order of those people. And again, this is existing policy from previous years that has basically been reapproved. And then finally, if you're a recent project that you're not making enough process, it could be a reason to be put you in tier 2 or not included. But I think more than likely, somebody will have a conversation with you, everyone home or home base, about what it might take to reallocate or right size you, given nobody will be forced to reallocate. On that note, voluntary reallocation policy. Any projects that have underspending of their grant funds will be encouraged to voluntarily offer to reduce their grant award. That money goes back into the pool for new projects. So again, it's voluntary. But if you see you're more than 10% or your double digits underspending, it's a way to do two things. It's a way to make sure you're serving the people that you actually feel like you can serve every year. It's a way to make sure instead of getting like 6 out of 10 points on something, you get 10 out of 10 because you're able to serve the people and not keep getting taken down from the people you have been able to serve or put in. And it puts money back into the community for a project that can use it and feels they can spend the money. So that's kind of the thinking there. I'll pause for questions in a minute, but I want to share scoring results will be shared via email, and next steps in the appeals process will come with that. And so that was on the timeline, and we're working back from those dates that HUD said, I think November 1st, back from that. People have 2 business days to submit. It's going to be reviewed by non-conflicted members of the appeals panel. So again, the people reviewing the NOFO, doing the NOFO committee work, non-conflicted, and then the people doing appeals will be non-conflicted as well, doing the appeals. Appeals get limited to anyone who feels that they were not evaluated according to the published scoring criteria or evaluated in a way that violates federal regulations. But also, if you appeal, it has to be something that would change your score and change where you were positioned. So both things basically have to hold true. But essentially, if somebody wasn't scored according to criteria, or the adjustment of their score might move them around, then those people would be eligible to appeal. And we'll explain more of this at our technical assistance bidders conference. Yeah, let me get through a couple more and then I'll pause for questions, but feel free to put in the chat. So these are things that people, if you're renewing, you need to continue to honor these things. Technically, if you're not in adherence to this, you can't even apply. So even as a renewal, but I think folks are participating in coordinated entry, adhering to low barrier housing first, and that their eligibility for clients is consistent with CE standards. So all of these things have to be true and are technically not scored, but they have to be true for you even to apply. So if you have an issue with one of these, better to talk sooner than later. Here's where there's 5 different sections that people are going to be renewed on. The bulk of the points are from section 1. I think it's probably close to half, maybe 48, related to objective performance outcomes. And then there are chunks for each of the others. So section 1 is going to get pulled from your APRs, and so it's objective, and it'll look at things. There are little nuances between like PSH, RH, and TH, but it's kind of based exactly on how the APR questions are framed for each of those projects. So like maintaining and obtaining. Maintaining is often closely related to PSH, where obtaining and maintaining might be more for rapid rehousing. But essentially, you're going to be looked at: are you keeping people housed? Are you getting people housed? And when they exit, are they exiting to permanent housing? Are they maintaining or increasing their income? Your participants, are obtaining or maintaining non-cash Main Street benefits? And then are they exiting, are they exiting to homelessness versus to a permanent supportive housing? So pretty standard. Right now, I don't foresee changes being made there for performance outcomes, but HUD is really emphasizing. I can note when we talk later about what's in the NOFO that is forcing us to change the scoring tools. One of the things we don't have to change is being objective in following system performance measures, because you already have them. If for any reason these got weakened, then you'd be not adhering to HUD's priorities and you'd be heading in kind of the wrong direction. So right now you're safe. The things you have in there meet the criteria, but HUD wants to see, as much as narratives have a place, HUD wants to see you're basing things on objective criteria and it can be compared across the board and related to system performance measures. Section 2 is on coordinated entry and serving the highest need populations. This info is pulled more from narratives or data that you provide, but they want to see that you've operationalized the participation, so you're filling vacancies according to the local process. They want to see that people are continuing to take steps towards simplifying enrollment, especially for, we know so many of you are serving very high needs folks, and providing data on openings, referrals, and filled vacancies. And I think related to even that second bullet, denials of CE referrals. If you're housing first, there's very little reason to deny someone that you get referred through coordinated entry. It would basically be like, we're a aid serving program and they're not meeting that criteria. Generally, if like they're not sober or have criminal background, none of that really should be used to prevent anybody from being accepted. So you're being asked to do that. And again, this is the same as before. I'm just going to cover these last three and I'll take questions on any of them. So currently also in 2019, there was a grant management and cost effectiveness scoring piece that is again from data and any evidence you provide, but you're going to look at reports and invoicing timeliness. This is about spending on your money, your capacity and utilization. So that's looking at, are you keeping your units filled? And then grant spending, are you spending down your grant and not leaving money on the table? As you may know, I can take any of that money back that we don't spend and you can never get it again. So it's really critical. And that's why reallocation is always kind of a thing that's lurking. Section 4 is organizational capacity, again, pulled from data or evidence you provide. They'll look at HMIS data quality. If they're fiscal management, it's really about like, do you have an audit that you produce and are there any findings? And then finally, what steps around quality assurance. So consumer surveys, board involvement, training. And then finally, there's incentive points that rewards if you do voluntarily reallocate or you seek to consolidate, because these are things that just help kind of right size and ease administrative burden. So there are points there for doing those things. No, that was a bunch. So I'm happy to back up to any of those slides. But essentially, I think the things to consider here are, that sounds like what I remember, or it doesn't, or there's something you really think should be considered as a renewal project, or I guess even, you know, if you have any thoughts at this point about, you know, introducing new projects and placement and like that, but I think particularly on the scoring tool. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has anything. Okay, that just tells me I'm just doing the best job ever of explaining everything. So I appreciate your support. The one proposed change to the renewal project scoring criteria right now, and please just bear with a couple of things. It affects right now people who serve victims. And so there's domestic violence criteria that HUD is basically wanting to see. So the proposed language is in order to not mess with anything that exists that everyone, you know, didn't have any comments on right now, is to not really mess with what exists and to try and find a place within the current criteria that wouldn't throw off all this scoring hopefully wouldn't be too punitive and wouldn't make you add a whole bunch of new scoring criteria that would mess anything up. That being said, it doesn't have to be done the way I'm about to propose, but the way I'm proposing is the easiest way in my mind to be the least impactful on the current way you do scoring. And like I was saying, for new projects, there's some other things we're considering about leveraging housing. This is the main one for renewals. The new projects, I think it's easier to put in now because we're going to give people advance notice, whereas this would impact somebody who's already doing the work. So at the top of the screen, it says you can get 1 point. And for these points, for this top point, we're talking about on the COC application as a whole, the whole community, it's how you get more money, all of that. For the points below in the recommendation, those are directly related to the scoring tool of the individual projects. So these points speak to different things. So what the new guidance says is that they want to see objective criteria in the scoring tool that shows how a domestic violence project has improved safety. So this could be done in a number of ways, obviously. I know a lot of providers, and even through coordinated entry, they do safety planning, and then they evaluate whether people still feel safe along the way. So in order to do something like evaluate safety planning or something like that, you would need a brand new criteria in the tool. And it would put DV projects in kind of a slightly different scoring total or something that would have to get worked out. So as sort of a middle ground, this is the proposal to have this be for a renewal victim service provider, and probably for a new project, they'll have to address this just maybe in a different way. But for renewals, it's to potentially add the language. So right now, since so much of the scoring criteria is objective, and it's just like, what does the APR say? Or did you spend your money, right? There are very few places to insert something like this. The one spot I found was in quality assurance, and that largely speaks to like surveys and training. So everyone right now, the blue language is what would be new. The one that's already in the bullet is what already exists. So everyone right now is being evaluated whether they have an existing consumer satisfaction survey, and you can get a point if you do. The added language to make sure we meet this criteria is to say, for victim service providers, consumer surveys must assess client safety to receive points, right? So a victim service provider who is renewing would not have been notified of this, obviously, all this past year that they were supposed to be doing this survey. So either we just accept that is the way that it is, and maybe the victim service provider struggles a little bit on this. Maybe the victim service provider spends the next few weeks at least surveying clients on this question or adding a question to their current survey. But this would be the way to just insert it into something you're already doing. I think next year and in the long run, all these things you want to kind of reevaluate on a more holistic place, how to deal with racial equity, how to deal with lived experience, how to deal with DV. But for like the time window that we have and how we're trying to move, this is one way to do it. The other pieces, and then sure, someone can weigh in, but the other piece to add in would be that victim service in the second bullet, that they're using they're using the feedback to inform program planning, and then there'll be a special victim service says also take into consideration improvement of client safety. And then finally, there's one on training where everyone's supposed to be getting training to get the points, and the victim service providers. And this one, I think you're probably actually safe because you're probably doing it. But victim service provider staff training would include resources for improving client safety. So that's how it is. That's how it is as a proposal. Certainly open to hear how else this could be scored, but we just want to be weighing the impact. So if there's a victim service provider in the room or somebody familiar with the field, I'd certainly welcome your feedback first, but open to take anybody else's. I'm just going to check the chat because I think Paul put something in, but raise your hand, come off mute, jump in. Paul is asking, is this the only opportunity for community input we have through the first? So that's what we're asking people to do, is to share written feedback through the first by you or anybody who wasn't able to attend this process. Certainly when there are public forums for COC board meetings and other things, that's your right as a member of the public to share things, but ideally we're getting the feedback in the next couple of days because that's why we're leaving it open a couple of days. We know it's a lot. Beth, very valid point. Beth just sharing, hard to adapt a survey under this timeline. So potentially need to confirm it, which I think totally makes sense. I think even if like you adapted it, started getting it out, you'd be fair to say this year you did it, right? even if you got one. I hate to set the bar low, but on a year like this where there's such a change, even administering the survey and doing it for one person, I think would get you the points this year, and then it's something to revisit next year. But certainly Everyone Home or NOFO committee can tell me if I'm speaking out of turn.
So the DV bonus project that, so Ruby's Place that Beth is with they just got their money last year for housing, and then, but the other DV bonus project that's been funded for 2 years is more of a systems change project. It's not direct client serving. It does include training for service providers, like training on domestic violence for homelessness service providers. So it's kind of apples and oranges.
The second one, is that a COC funded program?
So what, the training piece? Do you mean?
Yeah,
This
you
is
said
all
there was that
funded.
other.
This is all, it's all one project. The training and the systems coordination and impact piece. It's one DV bonus project altogether.
Okay, so yeah, if it was a renewal project, because I'm only asking because we renew and score by COC project. So if that project comes in under one name, then it's going to be assessed all within the same thing. And if it's being renewed, then it would come into this renewal project criteria where you'd have to have a survey doing something like this in the way that it's being proposed now.
But this, okay, but I get that, but this is, so everything we're doing, because it's domestic violence based, will be geared towards, I mean, it's all geared towards safety of survivors, but it's not a direct, like none of that renewal is a direct client serving project.
Okay, might need to talk more because I'd be curious, is it a coordinated entry project?
Yeah, maybe we should just talk offline, because the other piece that we've been encouraged by the county, you know, by Carrie Abbott's office, we've been talking to them, but to apply for the expansion is also a systems-based piece. It's not a direct client serving piece. It's so we may just need to talk to you about it. So it's kind of, it's not a traditional, like, we're going to use this money to just serve survivors.
So the only way, I appreciate your points. The only way you're permitted to do that is if you do a supportive service only coordinated entry project. You cannot do supportive, you cannot do a project under COC in the bonus that doesn't directly serve clients with housing. Unless you do it as you're part of coordinated entry and you're taking on a role for the whole system to help evaluate people at entry and then get them placed. The money can't be used otherwise, unless Carrie's thinking you're using planning dollars, which have nothing to do with this. And you don't have to competitively renew, you can just spend them however the person who receives them gets them. So there may be more nuance. And so happy to like talk about that piece a little further. And then maybe we can do that in the next couple of days before we meet with the NOFO committee. So maybe it's something we could work out with Everyone Home to speak with you, or Home Base could, and follow up if that makes the most sense for you, because I want to be sure that we're clear on where you're coming from in that comedy.
Yeah, I think my concern is just that we're actually a sub-grantee. The primary, the lead staffer on for the primary agency is on vacation right now. So
of course, yeah,
of course, right. So I'm concerned about the timing. Okay, I'll just connect with you offline.
Yeah, please do. And we can definitely see whether or not this survey piece is really going to work for you all. And then if not, is there kind of a workaround for this current year? And then I think something for the community to reevaluate for the future year. Any other comments? If there are any other victim service folks or anybody else who wants to weigh in and say this looks good, or if you have a brilliant idea. Otherwise, I know it's a lot to figure on the spot. Okay, I know we go to 1:30.
I want to comment.
Jump in.
I'm not sure that I'm totally understanding all the nuances here, but if the point is really about improving victim safety, what about just noting the number of clients who have safety plans in place?
So you have to show you've improved safety. So I think the reason I went the survey route was you could say on a scale of 0 to 10, how safe did you feel coming in? On a scale of 0 to 10 later, how safe do you feel? And then you could show you've measured improvement of safety. I do think by the fact of doing a safety plan, you are improving safety. It's just questionable how objective that piece is. And maybe that's the way you go, is you just say, as a threshold criteria for DV projects, you are doing safety planning, and projects are going to be asked to note the amount of plans they've done as part of a threshold thing. It just gets tricky if you don't score it with points. It's just, we don't have enough information this year to know exactly how they want you to put it in. So I'm giving you kind of the place that I think does everything in one situation, but I think what you've suggested could work either as part of threshold, or you'd be creating a brand new criteria, but it would only apply to DV. And then you just have to figure, like, how else do other people get points for that same thing? Are you just prioritizing DV projects by giving them a point? You could go any of those routes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So think about it. Email us in the next couple of days if you have thoughts, because this is what we're going to take to the NOFO committee. So we want to hear from you sooner than later, and then reach out and we can have a specific conversation too, potentially about that one project. I'm going to move us along, and I apologize. I know it's a lot. We will have more information at the time for when you actually go to apply. We're just trying to get through as much that you all could weigh in on as an input session. So local application updates. Essentially, and Max, I'll just start to put you on the spot. Essentially, what we want to cover here is just some information about what the system will look like that you are going to be using to apply. Just as a quick preview, this isn't going to be a full set of instructions. More of that will come. Max is coming on video, and Max is going to show, as he's the one who helps build this stuff out for Homebase, what this looks like. It is new, so anything new obviously has things that come with it, but it should make, I think, life a lot easier in terms of filling things out, accessibility, seeing stuff, transparency, all of that good stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing. Max, you got enough lead time to get ready?
Yeah, ready, set. Thank you. And thanks everyone. And just by way of brief introduction, my name is Max, and I also work closely with Aram and the rest of the team here at Homebase. And as he said, we've been in a pretty intensive process over the past couple of weeks to build out Presto for your community. Presto is a proprietary product that we build here at Homebase that facilitates local competition processes. And the long and short of it is that we have digested all of your scoring tools and application processes from past years and turned it into this web-based and highly digital format that will largely do a lot of that math that you were previously doing. It'll do it for you, and it will produce these, as Aram termed it, easy to read reports that will make it much easier for your panelists to review the project performance and rank projects toward the priority listing and toward the end of NOFO. So with that little bit of pretext, I'm going to start screen sharing here and show you, this is going to be a very high level, very brief, just sort of touchstone intro to give you just a sense of what you're going to be looking at in the near future. We're going to do a much more in-depth tutorial on how to actually use these tools at a later date. So right now I'm just trying to give you a little preview so that this stuff looks familiar to you, at least when that point comes. So when you first log into Presto, especially for those of you who are renewals, we've already engaged with you to some extent. A lot of you have already submitted supplemental responses via questionnaire. So some of this may look familiar, but for those of you who are new, when you first type in Presto, the URL, this is the first thing you're going to see. And you punch in your email and your password, and that would then take you to this page. So you'll see something that looks like this. It would have your projects listed over here on the left-hand side if you have multiple, or if you just have one, the total dollar amount that you're requesting, and the name of your agency. Then you'll have a couple of different options available to you depending on how far along we are in this process. Presently, the only thing that would actually be open is the questionnaire. So if you were to click that type your answers button, then it would actually take you to this screen. And this is where you actually see all of the questions that are required to complete the application. And we've tried to organize this sort of in order, tracking along with your scoring tool. So for those points of evaluation that are enumerated in the scoring tool, if there is a narrative question that somehow ties into it or is related to it, it will follow in sort of a chronological order, top to bottom, if you will, along with the scoring tool. So you would then take the time to just answer these questions, make your way down. Of course, save early, save often. Hate it when the computer crashes and something is lost. If you're typing an especially long essay answer, oftentimes we recommend typing it in a Word program just in case your browser has an interruption. Yeah, you'll just work your way through answering these various questions. And once that's complete, these responses and narratives are actually being logged and aggregated alongside your data for renewal projects, at least, into a project report. The report is going to look a little something like this. This is just a test project. There are random values in here that do not correspond to any current project in Alameda. But this is just, like I said, just an example so that you have an idea of what you're going to be looking at. So you'll have your project name up here. You'll have your agency's name here. There will be a link here to any supplemental application materials that need to be submitted so that a panelist can quickly access those materials by just following this link. And this report format is going to first be for your verification so that you can make sure that the data that is reported through is accurate and also that your narrative responses are correctly showing up in the right place. And then this report its real primary purpose is for the panelists to be able to quickly assess the projects against one another. So you've got a table of contents here. There will be some context information up near the top of the report. And then down below, you've actually got the scoring factors that are related to the project's performance. So I'm going to gloss past the context stuff because, again, it's an example report. There's not a whole lot of information about this fictional project that I've created. And skip right down here and bear with us. Sorry, we've got some placeholders in here as we build out a couple of other little items, but suffice to say, this percentage outcome that you see next to most of the factors is the value that will actually wind up being scored. So in the case of, say, factor 1B, this example project has 53 out of 83 participants maintaining or increasing their income. That's a total or a percentage value of 70.7%. So this is the value that's actually going to be assessed against the scoring scale, and some sort of pre-scored value will be produced for this project based on that. And we'll actually have a separate box that shows up in the report at a later date that assigns a point value to this project for this particular factor. So that's how the data-based measures are going to come through. And then, of course, down in section 2 starts where we're going to see some of the scoring factors that rely heavily on narratives. So if you recall, I was showing you this questionnaire just a moment ago. This question is going to ask about coordinated entry and filling project vacancies. That response would then appear right here. So whatever I put into this box is going to appear just beneath the prompt here to give the panelists the context to answer the question. So that's, again, very high level, very brief overview of how this works, what it's going to look like. And I'm happy to pause here and take any questions if anyone has them. I think in keeping with Aram's take on that, hearing no questions means I did a fantastic job. So I'm going to pat myself on the back and pass the baton. What is next up on the agenda?
Yep, that was our question and answer piece for here. The remaining thing that we have on the agenda, and then I think we can just open it up for everything that folks might want to speak to. But I just reposted the timeline just to give people a sense of that. And maybe Esther and Max, if you can drop our team email in again, I'll flash on the screen for a second. But alameda@homebaseccc.org. This will reach all of us and more people to make sure that we can be responsive to you throughout this process through the next couple of days. And then as you are applying, as you hit a snag in Presto, as you hit a snag in eSnaps, Home Base will be here to support folks. So that's pretty much what we have. There's about 14 minutes left. So we have the timeline up. If there's any questions there, again, the next big one is the 13th, where you're going to get a bigger view of Presto and other things at that point, once we've kind of ironed some things out and met with the NOFO committee to see what direction they're going. But open to hear any feedback on renewal scoring, timeline, or anything else that has come up for folks. So we'll hang for a few and see if you have anything. Starting to see some questions come in, some sent just to me, so hopefully I can share those. But what types of expansion projects have we seen was one question that came in. A common one I've seen lately is just folks expanding rapid rehousing. And so if they have a certain amount of units and they feel like they can serve more people, that's one of the ways that folks could expand. This year, it would be interesting to see if anybody wants to expand to serve victims of domestic violence. You could still preserve what you were doing with the added funds coming in. I have a feeling we'll start to see more of that. If you added units to a PSH project, potentially you could expand your permanent supportive housing project there as well. Hopefully that helps to answer that one. Will there be a formal rank and review process where we meet with the committee? So as far as I understand, everything that gets put into Presto, we will kind of verify with you all that it's all looking good. That will then go to the committee. All the objective stuff will pretty much be scored as it looks on the scale, but we'll be trying to give you a deadline or some narrative space to explain if like COVID or other things got in the way, for people to explain away some of those things. And then I believe the appeals process still permits to be present or have an interview or submit responses as it works with the schedule. So that I think hopefully is responsive to your question, but Olivia is saying more if not there. I'm gonna look at Beth's quick though. Local deadlines for eSnaps and narrative were different from each other. Are they the same this year? So there will be probably an expectation that eSnap should be done by the time all this local application stuff is there, but Homebase likes to review what you've done in eSnaps and make sure you're not kind of missing anything. So I could see there being a little extra time as long as we don't fly in the face of HUD's where was it? I'll go back quick, forgive my scrolling. What we're up against is HUD's timeline. So everything is required to be submitted by October 17th. So we just have to make sure that eSnaps and all of that is done by then. But I think generally it's going to be aligned with the same date. We just might have a little wiggle room if people need more technical assistance. Okay, looks like that answered. Cool. Any other? All really good questions, so keep them coming or send them our way. Well, thank you for Thank you for including us. Hopefully we are going to be helpful. Really are here to help make things transparent and provide as much technical assistance as you need. Renewals, you'll probably know the drill, but Presto may be new, so that may be the area there. If you're a new project and want to do some thinking about it, I would do that sooner than later. I would be talking to Everyone Home or the county or Homebase to, Homebase can certainly help with any of like the actual specifications of the NOFO. It may be good to explore with Everyone Home if they're like around project design or other things, as they know the community very well. But thank you, Chelsea. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I just want to reemphasize that this year we're trying to make sure that we're responding to the feedback that we received in the past. So that's one of the reasons we brought in Homebase to try to streamline this process. Information will be posted on our website following this meeting, including the video and the timeline. We will be disseminating information via email, so stay tuned for that. And also, of course, soliciting your feedback on today's presentation, but also any other questions you have. And so thank you for joining us. We look forward to working with you to submit a successful application and bringing these resources, these much needed resources to our community. So thank you, and everyone stay safe. Thanks, Aaron.